One of the most basic drawings that architects use to analyze their architectural programs is something called a bubble diagram. And these bubble diagrams and the icons that go with them are easiest to be done in Adobe Illustrator. So we're going to learn both at the same time. And first of all, what is an architectural bubble diagram? It indicates graphically the program relationships between the different elements in your architectural program. And they can be proportional to the square footage of those program elements. For example, a lobby may be 100 square feet and an office may be 200 square feet. You could draw a bubble that has twice the area of the first one. And you do not typically show the floor plan if this is a renovation situation. And of course, if it's a fully architectural project, which is to say no building, then there's no floor plan to show. You're just studying the relationships between the program elements. And what are those relationships that we want to show? Well, for us, the top four here are going to be ingress and egress, which is to say the entry or exit. The circulation pattern, which connects those entries, and usually there's at least two. And then two other factors, acoustical and visual connection or separation. And this is important in any sort of design when you're first laying out the kind of space planning. You want to make sure that some spaces which are, say, noisy, like a toilet room with air hand dryers, is not right next to, say, a quiet reading room for a library. Whereas other times you might want a visual connection or even an acoustical connection, for example, between a kitchen in a restaurant and the eating space. Depending on the type of restaurant, you may want this boisterous feel of hearing the kitchen fans and cutting and frying, all that. You might want to hear all of that, or you might not. Anyway, there are a number of other things which can be shown on these bubble diagrams, not for us, unless you really want to, and these include things like programmatic proxemics, which spaces should be near each other or should not be near each other or do not need to be near each other, public and private, also things like daylighting, and then you can go on and on. There's many ways to analyze a program, often based on the type of project at hand. And here are some examples, and what you'll see here, the graphics can be quite variable. They often have to do with the kind of preferences for aesthetics of the person doing the diagram, or they can be what they came up with initially, and they may end up changing later on. The primary elements here are these bubbles of different sizes, and there are also icons which are visible. This one indicates daylighting. Just the same in this one, the sun indicates daylighting. These arrows, I believe, represent connection between spaces, or arrows like this may indicate a actual physical connection as opposed to a visual connection. She has a whole key that goes with this bubble diagram so that you know what each of these things mean. For example, maybe this is entry, or maybe this one's entry. I honestly can't remember. And as you can see here, the graphics can be quite variable and interesting and can have a kind of aesthetic of their own, which is really kind of an interesting initial exploration of the aesthetics of a project, kind of even before you've actually even done any designing other than kind of this more conceptual space planning layer. And in this case, there's a lot of lines of various types, dotted lines, dashed lines, and also arrows and other elements. Finally, another example, and again, these can have a more kind of precise, very strict kind of architectural look to them, but they can also be more casual and even kind of playful in the way that they're arranged. So let's take a look at Adobe Illustrator. And Adobe Illustrator is a great program for drawing what are called vector graphics. And these are graphics that basically are itty-bitty little mini algorithms, mathematical algorithms that describe lines and other elements. And they can be scaled as big or as small as you want without any loss of fidelity. which is different than a raster editor, which is something like Photoshop or any photo editor, where when you zoom way in, you start to see a lot of pixels, a lot of dots. We don't like that. So anyway, I'm going to open up Illustrator and click Create New. And we can take a little tour. Now, one of the issues with Illustrator, it does have a lot of different ready-made sizes of sheets here. You can go to letter or legal, tabloid. Let's just go with letter, and let's go with a horizontal landscape format. Just be aware you should change the size of the scale that they use here from points to inches. That'll just make your life a little more familiar unless you're used to working in inches. And there are lots of templates here if you're trying to put together some kind of, I don't know, logo or handout or something like that. The rest of the settings we're going to leave as is. I'll click Create. And this program is very similar to a lot of drawing programs in that you'll see there's kind of a big area on your screen which looks suspiciously like a blank sheet of paper. There are a series of tools here on the toolbar. This is the default toolbar, and it can be hidden or not. There are pull-down menus, and the pull-down menus basically repeat most of the tools which are available here. There's also kind of a status bar up here which shows kind of what's going on right now. So if you start a tool and you start drawing, you'll see all these numbers and other pieces of information change. Also, there are what are called workspaces. Up here in the upper right it says Essentials. And there's also Essentials Classic, which is sort of an older view. And if you choose one of these, you'll see that the menus which are available change. All the menus are still here. If I go back to Essentials, you know, they don't disappear. They just organize them slightly differently. All of these palettes which pop up can be made to show up again just by going to the Window pull-down menu and opening them up. Now, any of you who've used simple drawing programs, you probably can guess about some of these simple drawing tools. For example, the pen tool. You click on the pen tool, you just start clicking, and guess what? It draws lines, okay? And you can go back to the start and make it a closed loop or not. The curvature tool looks a lot like the pen tool, except you can draw curves. And each of these curves are editable. Now, the sneaky truth is that if you click with the pen tool but start clicking and dragging, you can kind of mix between straight lines and curvy lines. Okay. There's also a line segment tool. One of my favorites here, and we'll be using this a lot, is a shape tool. You can draw a circle just by clicking and dragging. Okay. If you click and drag while holding down Shift, it will lock the proportions. And you might say, wow, all I can draw is circles. If you click and drag on this tool, you will see a whole bunch of other tools. We can draw stars and flares and all sorts of fun things. One of the other basic concepts of how Illustrator works is each of these shapes, and some are made by the pen, some are made by the shape tool. There's a number of different ways you can do these. They are called paths, like a path through the woods, except they are a path through your drawing. They can be selected as a whole using the selection tool. And that's kind of a clever name for it, isn't it? You can then click and drag on the object to move it around. There are handles here around the perimeter. You can change the size. You can kind of warp it or hold down Shift to change its size proportionally. And you can even rotate it by using your mouse, leaving your mouse over the edge and get the rotate handle. Now, what if you want to actually change how the curve is drawn? Then you have to use this direct selection tool. What that will allow you to do is now I can come in and grab one of these anchor points and then click and drag it in different ways. Each anchor point, depending on if it's a straight line or a curve, it might have some of these Bezier handle manipulators here, which allow you to kind of change the curvature of the anchor point, in addition to just changing its location by clicking on the anchor point itself. Finally, the last basic element of Illustrator is that every object has two kind of basic elements to it. It has what's called a stroke, which you can see up here in this upper menu, And it also has a fill pattern. Now, the fill pattern is on the left here, and these are all white because that was my color here. That's my foreground color, the fill color. The color behind it, by the way, is the stroke. I can change that color in either location by double-clicking on this to bring up a menu, or I can click on it in the down arrow here. Okay, so you have multiple choices. You can change the fill just by choosing a different color, and you can change the stroke color in the same way. So I can make the stroke green, and I can make it a heavier line weight. And now you can see I have a very strange and somewhat disturbing looking color scheme, but I can change these quite effectively. Also, each stroke and fill can have much more advanced properties, which we'll get to when we start drawing our bubble diagram. So let's take a look at our architectural program, which is going to be a sandwich shop. And I've broken down the program into some of those basic elements you might expect to see in a sandwich shop. The dominant space is the sandwich counter, which you might imagine that's where all the action happens. But there is an entry vestibule with 2 doors to keep the cold wind out. There is a sodas cooler where you can get your non-caloric beverages. And of course, a checkout counter where you can pay and pick up those impulse purchases. Finally, there's a few supporting things: cold storage, dry storage, and some garbage and deliveries area. Now, I also took the liberty of assigning both a square footage and a diameter for a bubble that we can use. Now, I did not go and use the area of a circle formula to get the exact diameter of 50 square feet, what that might be in scale. I just kind of estimated, and that's fine. We are going to make our bubble diagram proportional, but not necessarily to scale. So anyway, each of these bubbles will represent more or less the area of that program element. So back here in Illustrator, let's draw some bubbles. And first of all, let me delete everything. Control A or Command A selects all. That's what the A stands for. And then you can just tap the delete key. I'm going to go and activate my circle tool, and it's actually the ellipse tool. If you're not seeing the ellipse tool, but maybe a rectangle, which is the default, just right-click on it, and you'll see a bunch of different tools in there. I'll go with the ellipse tool. Now, I could click and drag a circle, but if you just click once to place the circle, you'll see a little menu pops up saying, hey, how big do you want that circle to be? And in this case, we'll start with the sandwich counter, which I believe was 5 inches in diameter. And I'll just tap Tab to jump from one to the other and click OK. And it will draw a lovely circle for me. So your basic circle is, well, kind of boring, isn't it? I'm going to go over to the right here side menu and click on the Properties menu. And I'm going to make some editing changes to this circle using the Properties menu, just because I like having all the different buttons visible. Now, first of all, the fill color, that's kind of up to you. Of course, there's no recipe for exactly the colors that make a good bubble diagram. So I'm going to just click on the yellow here, or orange, or whatever color that is. Same with the stroke. There's no magical stroke that looks the best. I'm going to stick with the black lines for now. One of the simplest things that you can do that looks kind of nice is to add a drop shadow. Now, that is what's called an effect. And I can just click on this button here, FX, which is short for effects. And you can see there's a whole bunch of different effects, and it kind of groups them by Illustrator effects and, interestingly enough, Photoshop effects. And you'll learn more as we go with Photoshop, but some of them are kind of more destructive than others, like rasterize will convert this to a picture. We just want to stylize it and choose drop shadow. Now, like a lot of these effects, there's a menu, and you do want to check the preview button so you see what the effect is going to look like. And then you can change a number of other features, how big the X and Y offset are. You can just click on the numbers here, and you see how the shadow moves. I can move it up or down, make it softer or blurrier or less blurry. We can come down here. That's a little blurry. You can also type in numbers too. So if you can't find by clicking on the button the kind of sweet spot of what you want, then by all means just come in and type in the number. Finally, I believe the default mode, this is what's called a blending mode, is multiply. And that's a little of a Photoshop kind of concept, but what it basically means is if it's black, it's opaque. If it's white, it's transparent, and this will allow you to see your shadow kind of on top of other objects. So anyway, I'll just click OK. And if you look at it and you're like, oh, I don't like that quite so much, you can click on the effect here, and the menu will pop back up, and you can make further changes. Now, I am not a great kind of chooser of colors, so my general rule is I try to tone down the basic colors that are in these types of diagrams. So to do that, you can call up a special color menu. It's called the color guide, and this will help knuckleheads like me who just aren't real good with colors. And you can stretch it out here. It takes your base color that you have used, and first of all, it comes up with a kind of harmony of other colors, but then you can also add add a tint, which is basically adding white to the color, or a shade, which is adding black to the base hue of the color. So I tend to kind of tint mine a little on the light side. That's entirely up to you as far as your color taste, but I find that too much color I get a little woozy. And when you're done with the menu, you can just click the little X to close it out. Finally, let's add a piece of text onto our beautiful bubble. I'm just going to go over here to the Type tool. Now, one thing is there are a bunch of different kinds of type tools, and depending on what you're doing, if you want a lot of text that is wrapping, you can have it fill an irregular shape, you can have it follow a path, you can make it go vertically. There's all sorts of different types of type that you can use, but I'm just going to use the basic one, and you could just click once to put an insertion point, or you can click and drag and it will fill a box with basic kind of default text. And I'll just come in here and type in sandwich counter. Now, most text, all text here, unless you edit it in some way, gives you the opportunity to change things like the font. It gives you your usual font options, including the size. Now, how big should the text be? Well, it depends kind of if you think of where you're going to present this and what type of situation. But if it's going on a board, 24 points is probably a good medium-sized text. Now, there are also paragraph settings here. You can make it centered, or you can make it right justified, or try to spread the text so that it fills the whole box. There's all sorts of things, but the typical way here is to have it be in the center. Now, interestingly enough, your text, which can be edited in those simple ways by clicking and dragging to rotate it or to change the size of the text box, you can also apply effects, just like in other objects. So if I wanted to have a drop shadow here on this piece of text, I could just choose that option here in the effects menu, and then just edit the drop shadow as I did before. The last really fun thing we can do to this bubble, if you think these sorts of things are fun, is to change the line to a more fun line type, like something hand-drawn. To do that, I'm going to open up the Brushes menu, and you'll see here there are some default brushes already in the program. If I just double-click on one of them, it'll bring up kind of more details about what these look like, and you can control the size and all that. Click OK. But what I do, if I can select my bubble, click on the brush, and it will apply it like so. And let me call up my Properties menu. And each brush is going to have kind of a different sweet spot for the point size, the stroke size. So this particular brush, I'm not overly fond of it. Let me show you here. There is a whole library of other types of brushes in here. I'll just click on the down arrow here, and it will give you a large number of them. Let's see, artistic is pretty nice. Let's go with chalk charcoal pencil. Opens up a whole nother menu with a whole bunch of other line types. So if you want something a little more hand-drawn looking, you can choose one of these, see which ones that you like. Again, I'm just double-clicking to apply it, and then make sure in the Properties menu that the stroke looks good with that particular line. That's a little heavy. I think I'm going to go back to 1. And you might be thinking, boy, we've really had a productive day, haven't we? We've drawn one whole bubble with a piece of text on it. Well, let's draw a few more bubbles. Now, I could just redraw them and reapply all the filters and effects that I've done, but I could also just use my selection tool. I'll draw a window. Now, Illustrator does not really have the crossing versus selection window that you see in something like AutoCAD. And I could absolutely just copy and paste these, Control-C, Control-V, or Command-C, Command-V. I could also group these objects, and sometimes this is a handy thing to do. I think I'm going to leave them as not a group for now, just because I'm going to be doing a lot of editing. But I could also just, with this Select command active, hold down the Alt button. See how my cursor changes to a double cursor? Now if I click and drag, I have a copy of my original selection. And you might say, well, but I don't want another sandwich counter. I want to have the sodas area. Well, I can come in here. First of all, I can select this circle and change its size to be the size of my soda counter. And after retyping sodas, I have my text here. I can control the width of the text. I don't necessarily need such a big text box here. And I'd like these to be perfectly aligned, just like the other ones. If I select them like so, and there is no crossing versus selection window in Illustrator, unfortunately. Everything is basically a crossing window. I can use this Align tools here in the Properties menu. I can vertically align them and horizontally align them. And because I have centered text, you can see that the text goes right on top of the bubble. And we can just repeat this process for all of the other program elements. And I'll just go down here to the bottom and choose Fit on Screen, and we can see what we have wrought with our little bubble diagram. So the next step in our process of drawing the bubble diagram is to organize all of these bubbles and start to look at the programmatic relationships. Now to do that, we're going to need to drag them all around our screen, and to make that easier, what we should do is select the title and its corresponding bubble and turn each into a group. What this will allow us to do, I can click on this once, and when I click and drag on the object, it will drag both of them. That's awfully handy. And you can still edit both by just double-clicking on the group. See how everything else gets grayed out. And now I can click on each individual piece and edit it as before. But it also means that it's a little easier, a little less likely to grab just a piece of text and a bubble by mistake. To exit editing the group, by the way, you can just double-click outside of it, or up here on the status bar, it does tell you you're inside a group. You can just click the arrow to go back to level 1, which is the sort of main drawing level. So the big question when you're thinking about programmatic relationships is which things should naturally go together and which things naturally don't want to be together. Now, an easy one here, sodas tend to be cold, so they probably want to be near cold storage. So I'm literally going to drag those two next to each other so that they are proximal, they're nearby, and that's actually known as proxemics. I can also have dry storage and deliveries. Those two seem to make a lot of sense because a truck pulls up and you're probably going to want to have the deliveries bring their boxes right in kind of to the near where they're going to be stored, rather than have to say walk through the sandwich counter and all that. Now, of course, you are going to want the entry and the sandwich counter near each other, and you're probably going to want the checkout counter also near all of these. So I can just drag each of these bubbles so that they represent that arrangement. And you can see here that just by moving the bubbles near each other, you kind of symbolically represent their relationships. Let me just finish moving these around. At this point, there is no building, so we don't really need to worry about, oh, where's the road and all that. We just need to worry about the relationship of these different things. And of course, some of them may be more linear in nature. For example, you want the sodas storage to be facing the sandwich counter, but you don't want the cold storage to be facing the sandwich counter. You actually want it to be separated from the sandwich counter. You don't want people wandering into your deep freezer there. And the same with the dry storage and deliveries. You probably do want those next to each other, but you don't necessarily want people at the sandwich counter to see the deliveries running in and out. Whereas the checkout and entry areas, those by all means can both be proximal, can be adjacent to the sandwich counter. And note that as you're moving these objects around, trying to kind of come up with the best arrangement, you can use the arrow keys to nudge them left or right. You can also right-click on the objects, and under the Transform menu, there is a Move tool. Now, for us, we don't really need to be quite so precise, but by all means, if you did have some exact inch dimension, you wanted it to move some certain amount, you could type that in, and what will happen is if you have the preview button checked, you'll see that it makes your object move exactly that amount. For me, in my preferences for bubble diagrams, I just tend to nudge them so that they are roughly evenly spaced, but also that it's clear there are certain relationships that are distinct between each of the programmatic elements. Now, this drawing is going to be probably pretty complex, so you're going to want to take advantage of one of Illustrator's internal organizational systems, which are layers. And we've seen layers before in things like AutoCAD, and it's here on your Layers palette. And by the way, if you don't see these palettes here, you can open them by going to the Windows menu, and then once the menu is up, you can drag it onto your sidebar like that, and it will remain there forever until you reset your computer. Anyway, I'm going to go to the Layers menu, and right now I have all these bubbles, so I'm going to call the layer that they're on Bubbles. And then I'm going to make a new layer, and I'll call this one Lines. Okay, and you can drag the order of these layers up and down. You can lock them. You can also make them invisible or not. See how I can just turn them off. But whichever layer you are on is the one that all new objects are going to get drawn on. The next step is to add in some linear graphics to help describe these relationships that we've been thinking about. So for example, the dry storage and deliveries, I said they should be next to each other. The sodas, sandwich counter, and cold storage should all be in a line. Well, we can actually just draw in a line to represent those relationships. And I'll just draw a single line here to get started. And each object in Adobe Illustrator, as mentioned, you can control a number of factors. So for example, I can just control the line weight here. Let's make it a really dark line. Let's go even higher. However, we can also, I'm going to keep going. We can control its stroke color. I don't want quite such a dark stroke. Maybe I'll go with a brown color. Let's see what that looks like. Yeah, that's a little bit more like it. Also, you can have objects in front of or behind other objects. So for example, I can select these two groups, grouped bubbles, and I can arrange them to come forward. And this is just like any PowerPoint or other slide type of show program. You can bring objects forward or backwards. Let me just see here, arrange, bring to front. There we go. So it hides that line. I can also make these objects show those lines behind. And actually, I think I'm going to do that because I want to be able to see those relationships with a little bit more emphasis. So if I go to the Transparency menu, and by the way, sometimes with different installations of Adobe Illustrator, you're not going to see some of these menus. You can always find them here in the pull-down menus. So for example, I don't know if this one here, the transparency menu or transform, if you like those menus, you can actually just drag them over into your sidebar menu, especially if you use them frequently. You can also drag them back out again and close them if you don't use them frequently. Anyway, each object in Adobe Illustrator blends with objects below it in different ways, and we can control that here in the transparency menu. The most simple one is something called multiply. And what this does is it allows a certain degree of transparency. So as I change the blending mode here from normal to multiply, you see how my line shows up underneath. Now, actually, as I look at it, I don't think I like that as much as I originally thought I would. I'm going to move this back and just have it go to the edge. I think that's a little clearer as to the intent. Now, if you want to make a copy of this line, you could by all means just do Control-C, which I tapped now, and Control-V or Command-V, and paste it in, and you'll get a new one in the middle of your project. I can just come in here, edit the anchor points, and of course, if I want a cleaner look, I can always arrange it and send it to the back. Then I can just paste in another one and modify that one to represent these primary kind of relationships where I want two spaces to be right on top of each other. Now, these lines are just lovely, but there are many other types of lines out there. The simplest thing you can do is draw a line that's dashed. Now I'm going to draw a curvy line representing the circulation through the project. And this circulation doesn't have to be 100% indicative of exactly how you would walk through the project, but just meant to show kind of the organizational scheme. I'm going to draw it with one of these beautiful splines. And then I can start to change the properties of that spline to make it a little more interesting. Now, first of all, I'm going to go to the stroke menu here. And the simplest thing you can do to a line like this is turn it into a dashed line. Oh, isn't that nice? And you can even control the dashiness. So if I change this number to 18, I can make the dashes longer or shorter. And I can also change how much of a gap is in there. So let's say I only want 9 pixels in each gap, or 9 points actually. And I can even change the spacing so I can make it a dash dot or that sort of thing. You see how you can just fill in numbers here in the chart. I think I'm just going to go with an even line here, but I'm going to make this a little longer here. Just a matter of taste. Oh, that's too long. Here, let's make these gaps a little shorter. There's, of course, no magic to any of this. Now, I do want this to show up on top of the other bubbles. And to do so, all you need to do is select the object and bring it forward. And when you bring it forward, don't forget, every line has been drawn on the lines layer. Now, I made that layer second, so it's here second in my list. I'm going to just drag it up to the top. You see how it shows up on top. And I can now also get rid of the fill color, which I don't really need. Change that. And this box with a slash through it means no fill. There you go. And you can do the same for the line color, the stroke color here. I'm going to make this some stroke color that's a little less obtrusive, although let's actually go with a red. But I'm going to change the transparency of the line so that it's not quite so, I don't know, annoying and obtrusive. So you see how you can graphically represent each element, you can graphically represent connections between those elements, and you can also graphically represent the circulation pattern through the project. Now, as you go and you tweak this this line, you can come in with the direct selection tool, select the spline that we drew, and you can modify each of these endpoints as you see fit. So I want to represent that there is kind of more circulation heading out the back door here. I can do so by clicking and dragging on my anchor point here at the end. The same with this end of the spline. I could come in, highlight that anchor point. See how it becomes red? And I can drag it, and I can even change the kind of Bezier rotation, angle this, to indicate that you come in through the entry and make your way through the project. Now, what if I want to add an anchor point in here to get this curvature a little more swoopy? Just click on the pen tool, and as you move your mouse over the line, you will see your cursor change from a star to a plus sign. And when you click on that plus sign, it will add an anchor point right in there, and that becomes something you can select with the direct selection tool and move it around and manipulate it. So there you go. There's your circulation pattern indicated on top of the bubble diagram. Finally, what if you wanted to, say, indicate a separation of elements? How would you graphically do that? Well, maybe a series of lines would be nice, and I think what I'm going to do is make a custom line type to indicate the separation between the dry storage and deliveries and the cold storage and sodas. You don't want the moisture and all that from this cold storage area to get into the deliveries and dry storage area. To do this, draw two lines. They should be straight, and they should also have the properties of the lines that you want to be created as a new pen or a new brush. So obviously manipulate these lines as you see fit. So I've made myself a nice gray line. I'm going to make a copy of it by just selecting it and holding down the Alt key and clicking and dragging. And you see how when I do that, in conjunction with holding down the Shift key, I make an exact copy of the original. And I think that'll make for a nice line weight. Now, why don't I just use that? I mean, I don't need anything else, do I? Well, the reason is, what if I want to draw several of these separations? I mean, this is a fairly simple bubble diagram, but sometimes you want to create a brush so that you can use it again in other situations. Now, as you're cleaning up your drawing, moving around the lines, of course, you can click on lines to move them, nudge them, click and drag on them. But sometimes it is hard when you're trying to edit anchor points of these complex lines. What you can do to make your life a little easier is right-click on the line you want to edit. In this case, this path for our circulation, and I'm going to isolate it. And now it's much easier. I mean, first of all, I can fiddle around with the width of the line much more easily. I can also come in here and grab anchor points much more easily and kind of fiddle with them without having to constantly select and deselect the objects that are behind them. Because, of course, Illustrator doesn't know what you want to do, so it is forever selecting kind of objects underneath or on top of each other. To exit this mode, by the way, just click the right arrow here to go back. Keep clicking until you're back into the drawing. The last part of our bubble diagram are little itty-bitty icons that we draw to represent kind of architectural features or elements that we want to highlight in the spaces that we have laid out. And these can be any number of things. For us, the entrance and exit, which are the same, ingress and egress. And we also want to indicate if there's any acoustical connection or separation, and visual connection or separation. And there are many, many other little icons that you will see as you look at other students' design boards, including sustainability or biophilia or color theory, and you would probably plop that icon down in spaces which have that as a major design theme. So for us, what do these look like? Well, here's a couple of examples, and they can be wholly abstract. For example, acoustical privacy. They can be not wholly abstract, like the wind direction looks like little kind of wind symbols you'd see in a cartoon, or visual privacy. It can look like an eyeball. The daylighting icon can look like a sun. Anyway, each of these icons, you are going to want to make sure that, one, it's somewhat related to what you're trying to represent, but then also that you have a key to your bubble diagram that explains how everything is put together. So in Illustrator, let's make a new file, just Command or Control N, and I'm just going to make it 2 inches by 2 inches. Okay. And that's a tiny little square, and we can draw really whatever we want here, and this will be an icon that we bring into our drawing. And you might say, well, why don't we just draw, why don't we just draw it in the file itself? Well, the reason is if you change your mind about the graphics or you want to update, say, your arrows by using a separate Illustrator file, if you go and edit that Illustrator file, that will, in your main bubble diagram, those links will update. So let's start by just drawing something simple like an arrow. And it's pretty straightforward. You're going to want to use the pen tool, but we need a little help to draw it, I don't know, neatly. And what we can do is turn on the grid and snap to it, kind of like we would in AutoCAD. And now what will happen, see how there's a grid visible here, and I'll just click to start my arrow, and we'll just draw it kind of like so. There's no magic here to drawing an arrow. Oops, except I need to fix it. And of course, you can make this have any properties you want. And the beauty is we can come in and change it later on. Let's give it a nice green property because that's entry. And I'm going to give it a special feature here called a transparent mask. And just to give it, I don't know, a little more. Now maybe I'll make the arrow, I don't know, a little more interesting. I'm going to stretch this guy out. Using my direct selection tool, I can grab all of these anchor points and kind of pull them up. And then I want to fade the bottom of this out to nothing. And the way to do that is go to your transparency menu. I'll just open that up, and there's something called a mask. And what a mask is, it's basically covers your main object. I'll click Make Mask and see how it disappears. And the way these masks work is you click on the black box here, and anything that is black will hide what's behind the mask, and anything that's white will reveal it. So first of all, I'm going to make my color here, my foreground color, white, and I could choose it from up here as well. And I'm going to draw a rectangle, and I think maybe I'll go with no stroke on the rectangle here, just because I can, and I don't want to confuse the colors. Now, when I draw this white box, you see how it's basically like a viewport in AutoCAD. It crops away the model. In this case, it's just my drawing. And what I want to do, I'm going to convert this box into a gradient. Now, a gradient is over here in our toolbar menu, and G is the quick keyboard shortcut. And a gradient, what it does is it can have a different pattern depending on which one you use, but it basically fades from one color to another. So if I choose a linear gradient, see how it fades basically from white to black. Now, as we said, black will hide, white will reveal, so we can pretty quickly fiddle around with this. There are adjusters here that we can control the location of each of the kind of fade points. But the other thing is, if we want a little bit more control, I think I want to rotate this guy up so that it's facing up. You will have to call up the gradients menu here. I'll just go to the gradient toolbar here. In fact, I'm going to drag it over into my sidebar because I know I'm going to be using this a lot. Anyway, some of those same controls are available here, but I can also control the angle. Let's go with -90. Oh, there we go. And I like the way it kind of fades off. And in fact, I think I'm going to adjust the fade a little bit so that it's a little more aggressive on the tail of my arrow. And that's all there is to it. Once you've got your gradient the way you like it, you can apply this to text. You can apply it to single lines even. And that really adds an interesting effect to your object. I'll click back on the main image to stop editing the opacity mask. And that's important because if you don't do that, you're gonna make yourself miserable. But now, after I save my icons drawing, I'm just going to load it into my other project. And here I am in my other project. I'll just go to File, Place. Whoops. Now, as you choose your file, be sure to click the Link button. and also show import options. And that is really important because if you make a change to your icon file, it will update in this bubble diagram file. So I'll choose place, and it says, oh, do you have some unsaved changes? It will also give you an option to pick the artboard that is available. In this case, it's got my arrow. I only have one artboard available, and I'll click OK. And then you can click and drag or just click to place the icon at its original size, and it becomes an object in your file that you can manipulate with all of our usual tools. It is not fully editable because it's in a separate file. It's a linked file. And so, for example, I can copy this guy, rotate it, but I don't want to recolor it here in this drawing. If I do that, I will want to go back to the original file. Okay, now if you do go back to the original file and change it, and here, let's go to the original file, and we'll make the line weight 3 instead of 1. When I hit save and go back to my bubble diagrams, you should see that it's going, you can update the file so that it reflects the changes you made. You can see here, when you make a change like that, it will warn you eventually that your file has changed. You just click yes, and it should update with the new configuration. Now, once you've got one icon going, why not go for a couple of others? Now, as I said before, you can absolutely just use funky line types to represent different elements, different programmatic relationships, but you can absolutely create new icons just like we did. First of all, let's create a new artboard. I'll go to the Window and Artboards menu, and I can click the little plus sign, and what you'll see, just zoom out for a minute, that now I have another kind of blank 2x2 box, and I could come in and draw some new icon to represent visual connection or to represent acoustical connection or separation. But I'm going to show you another tactic, which is to go and try and find some ready-made icons on the internet. Now, there are many ways to do this, and you can go to good old Google or anything to find icons that you like, but I searched for vector graphics and came up with this website, Vecteezy, which is free, and I like free. And you can search for any number of different icons. So, for example, I might search for eye, and you can see here that there are a number of different icons available. The big thing that you'll want to do is make sure you check free license, and that should filter it so that you only have free eyeballs. And we'll click through and see what we find here. And usually, so I've found some eyeballs that are very nice, and I'll click on the free download button. And of course, we have to continue and acknowledge the use of this free icon, which I'm doing here by letting this video play. Now, once they have been downloaded and extracted, you have to extract the zip file. These are often not in Illustrator file format, but in other file formats, in this case EPS, which is something that Illustrator can read. And when you double click on it, it will kind of guess, Windows will guess anyway, what file, what program you want to open it. I'm going to check the Always Use This app to open those files. And here we go. Here are my icons. And of course, these are typically either grouped or arranged in some other way. So you can copy and paste in what you want, copy and paste it into your own file. So I ungrouped this, and I used the selection tool to grab the eye. Ouch, that hurt. And then I'll just go into my icon drawing and paste it right in. And the beauty of these being in vector format is that you can resize them really without much trouble. I'm going to turn off my grid snap just so I can move things around a little more freely. But there we go. I have another icon. I'm going to save my file, and then I'm going to bring that into my bubble diagram like I did before. Now, back in my main drawing, when I place these embedded or linked files here, you'll see that you now have several pages that are available for importing. You just want to make sure that you choose the icon that you want. So I'll click the eyeball, And I want there to be a visual connection here between the sodas and the sandwich counter, which of course makes sense. You want people to have a good view of the sodas. And then perhaps an acoustical connection between the checkout and the sandwich counter. And again, I'll put in my icon for that. So with a little bit of touch up, I've got my diagram. The last piece of this whole project is to make a little legend to go with your diagram. And to do that, I'm going to make a new artboard like I did before. I don't need quite such a big artboard. So I'm going to use the artboard tool here in the toolbar to shrink this down a little bit. You know, really I just need kind of a small rectangular shape that I can put each element from my diagram and kind of explain what each of them means. Now I've copied in elements from the drawing, but sometimes you don't get the right object or you just draw, say, a new line. But I wanted to have this property. There is a special tool called the eyedropper tool. Select the object that's this destination object, then click on the eyedropper tool and move your mouse over the source object and click to apply the format. And as you look at your drawing, you may decide you want to change one or another elements. You can absolutely change the graphics. You should go and try and make it look as nice as possible. And any one element in your project, you can select that and get any other object that appears with the same kind of graphical characteristics. And then you can come in, and once they are selected, you can change their stroke or other feature. For example, I think these lines are a little heavy, and I'm going to drop the opacity down just a hair. Then anyway, once you've got everything all organized, you are going to want to make things nice and neat. Each line should be in alignment with each other. Now I have my properties menu open, and you can see here there are a number of different options for alignment. I'm just going to align these vertically one by one. You see how I can do that, and it looks so nice and neat. And again, just use a window to align them. Sometimes with double lines, things like that, it will not organize itself exactly right just by the way it kind of recognizes the line. So you can use your nudge tool to fix it. But then you should also have all of your text and all of your icons organized. I'm just going to deselect that icon. And they should also look neat. So I'm going to use, again, my Align tool and align them all nice and neatly together. This case, left justified. And then the icons, I'm going to center justify them. And oh, that looks so much neater. And basically, that is how you do your bubble and bubble diagram and a legend to go with it. As a little bonus, I'll show you how to convert your bubble diagram into a block diagram. That is not required for my class unless you want some extra credit. And what I did is I copied the bubbles down to a new artboard, and then I am ungrouped each one, and I'm going to select each of the bubbles. You just hold down Shift while clicking on the bubbles to get each one into the selection. Let me zoom in on all these so it's a little easier to see. And then it's quite simple. You just add an effect to those bubbles, which is convert to shape. And I'm going to go with a rounded rectangle, make it a little softer, but you absolutely can convert these to regular rectangles. And you see how it has converted these objects into basically a square shape because they were all round, perfectly round before. And you can move these around to create your block diagram. Now, for those of you who are in the interiors division, you're probably going to want a floor plan to lay this on top of. For the architectural students, you absolutely can draw in some walls if you want to represent that. What I would do is use one of your fancy brushes. And you can get one off of the brush library, or you can just use one of the standard ones, or you can make your own. And these brushes will allow you to make what essentially appear to be walls. Especially if you're not sure yet, you can always just make your bubbles, your block diagram line a little darker. To get a floor plan in here, your class may give you a floor plan, probably an image file format. I've got one here. I'll click Place. Select the plan and place. And we are not doing this to scale just yet. So I'm just going to place the plan on top of my blocks. And then one thing you're going to want to do is open the transparency menu and change the blending mode to multiply. And then you can see through the plan, and now you can manipulate your blocks and bubbles. And in this case, I think I may actually have to make my plan a little larger because it's a little longer than I thought. So I'll come in here with my artboard tool, stretch out my artboard, and then I can stretch out my floor plan to give me enough space to fit all of my program elements. But then it's just a matter of moving around the blocks and bubbles to fit with whatever plan you are given. And that's basically how you can quickly create a block diagram from a bubble diagram.